Thank you all for coming. We're here to talk about Lucrezia Marinella, who was born in 1571, died in 1653, and had an unusually long and productive life. I was talking to a colleague in the hallway the other day who said, I had no idea until earlier today that there were women writing epic poems in Italy. And not only were they writing epic poems, they were actually publishing them. And Lucrezia Marinella wrote in a host of genres. She's most famous for a treatise from 1600 entitled The Nobility and Excellence of Women and the Defects of Men. She went straight to the point. There was a rabidly misogynistic tract that came out in Venice, and she read it and had already been published, but she had written 2 poems about saints. But she read this treatise and said, this is bunk, and she goes about debunking all the misogynistic elements of this tract. And this essay is also pretty long. It's also available in the same series. And this is why she is mostly famous in the 21st century. But that treatise, as well as Enrico, are the exception to the rule in her production. She tends to write narrative poems about religious topics, lives of saints, the kind of stuff that we now dismiss as boring, but was actually central to life in early modern Venice, and something that women were allowed to write about, something that was becoming, that was bienséant, as the French would say. It is for this reason that it's all the more notable that she actually in the 1630s decided to write L'Enrico, or Byzantium Conquered, a heroic poem. We know of 4 epic poems that are assuredly attributed to women writers in Italy. 3 of which are now available in the series. I'm sorry about the plug, but the University of Chicago is spending a lot of money on these texts. And in fact, enough because the series is now going to the University of Toronto Press. But it will continue, which is very important. So the first one was published in Venice in 1581. It's an incomplete 13-canto poem entitled Floridoro. The second one, I'm going chronologically, is the Scanderbede by Margherita Sarocchi that was published posthumously in Rome in 1623. And then there's Enrico in 1635, and finally there's Ascanio Errante by Barbara Tagliamocchi dagli Albizzi, which is a sequel, if you can think of it that way, of the Aeneid by Virgil. This is somebody who clearly wasn't shy. I mean, you take on, it ends this way around Rome, and they found Rome. Forget it. I'm having Ascanius go on and do his own thing. Floridoro is actually a romance. It's not an epic poem, and it has some elements of the epic, but it's mostly about love. The Scanderbede by Margherita Sarocchi is a very, very interesting poem because women in Rome weren't exactly joining the conversation, as we like to say. As you recall, the Pope was always already a man and had a court mostly solely composed of men, with the occasional courtesan thrown in, for entertainment value. But Margherita Sarocchi actually takes a story from the 15th century about a leader, an Albanian leader who converted from the Muslim faith to Catholicism, essentially, and fought against the Ottoman Empire. And Marinella joins that side of the conversation, we, the good Christians, are supposed to fight the Turks, the infidels, by taking on the topic of Enrico. Let me very quickly hypothesize as to why women weren't writing epic poems. The epic is a genre that concerns political issues, highly public issues, and therefore it's very far from women's interests, from women's knowledge, or simply, even if they have an opinion, they are not asked to express it. But express her opinion Marinella did. In fact, she dedicates this poem to the Doge and to the Senate, joining a very public conversation about what Venice was supposed to be doing about these pesky Turks who were little by little dismantling the commercial outposts and the territorial belongings of the Serenissima. So she's really injecting herself in a debate about what to do about the Ottoman Empire. There were two parties. There was I guess the hawks and the doves. The doves were saying, well, you know, we've been negotiating with them for so long that we can just continue to do that. And she says, no, I'm definitely on the hawkish side. We need to go all out and battle them, just like Venice did in the Fourth Crusade. Now, the Fourth Crusade, for those of you who know your history, took place, and no, seriously, I had to really look this up as I was starting to work on translation. The Fourth Crusade took place between 1202 and 1204, and it was called for by Pope Innocent XIII, who was quite militant. I mean, he wasn't a happy-go-lucky kind of guy. He was also the one who did the crusade against the Cathars. Okay, so he was slash and burn in his approach to those who didn't think along my religious lines, or political for that matter. And after some convincing, Innocent actually managed to bring about to the idea of the crusade some Flemish and French noblemen who took the cross and sent envoys to Venice in order to find a way to literally cart them or ship their troops to Palestine, to the Holy Land. They went to Venice. They negotiated a very advantageous treaty from the Venetian standpoint. The troops marched down from the Low Countries and from France and from Germany and Bavaria and Saxony to Venice. They were conveniently housed on the Lido, which is the island in front that closes off the lagoon, which is a good idea because they were out there for a good long time because they didn't have the money. They simply didn't have the money to pay for passage. And the soldiers weren't happy. They had taken on the cross. They wanted to go free Jerusalem. I mean, for crying out loud, the infidels are still there. We got to do something about this. So the Venetians said, well, you want to go? We have the ships. Let's renegotiate this. And it was essentially a secret treaty whereby we are going, but en route, we are going to stop and take back the city of Zara, which is on the eastern coast in Croatia, in what's now Croatia, which was a very important commercial outpost for Venice that had been lost. So they took off, and they didn't tell this to the troops. They told the troops, go and fight, take the city, and they did. And yes, and right after they had taken the city, they were joined by an envoy, Peter Capuano, from the Pope from Rome, who was carrying with him an excommunication. Now, for those of you who aren't Catholic, this is really a big problem. The excommunication means that you are effectively no longer part of the Catholic Church. You cannot take sacraments. You can, if you die, essentially you go straight to hell, and you cannot be buried on hollow ground. The leaders kept this quite secret because, of course, this would not have been good news for the crusading troops who had quite literally taken on the cross, okay, in order to be absolved of all their sins, and if they happened to die en route or in battle, they could go to heaven. So imagine if instead of meeting St. Peter's, So they kept it very secret, and in fact the Frankish leaders managed to renegotiate this with the Pope, so the ones who were fighting the crusade under excommunication were only the Venetians. Okay, so at this point we are at Zadar. They spend the winter in Zadar, and then they're about to take off again. So this is the winter 1201 to 1202. And they hear that there is somebody who has taken over the kingdom in Constantinople, who overthrew the ruler, the legitimate ruler. And they said, well, you know what? You Franks still owe us a lot of money. So we'll take Constantinople and then we'll go to Jerusalem. And so they did. And so for the second time, they laid siege and finally captured another Christian city. Because Constantinople in 1202 was not a Muslim city. It was conquered by Mehmet the Conqueror in 1453, as most of you I'm sure know. So Marinella does this very clever thing whereby she mentions the fact that the Byzantines were Christians exactly once in the first canto, okay? And then she short circuits thinking that the Venetians, when they read Byzantium or Constantinople, they're gonna think, oh, the Turks, okay? And take out the garlic or some such thing, okay? So Marinella really does reshape the events to suit her purposes as a Venetian. And it also so happens that there are no contemporary 13th century, early 13th centuries relations or tales from the Venetian standpoint of what happened during the Fourth Crusade. So in essence,